they want their kids to go there. I mean, I think it's a different mechanism in preserving the status for yourself, but they're seeking out status for their children.
Hmm. Okay, thank you very much. And I want to read a quote here, and it says that the author, being yourself, reveals how tacit agreements between exclusive Ivy Plus schools and white affluent suburbs create widespread de facto segregation. And as a college degree continues to be the surest route to upward mobility, the inequality bred in our broken higher education system is now a principal driver of skyrocketing income inequality everywhere. So, what is it that most people do not know about those elite colleges and that you want them to know, Evan?
Okay, so I think most people have a sense that income inequality in the United States is extreme, more extreme than it's been at almost any other point in US history, and more extreme than it is at almost any other place in the world. What some people have a sense of, but may not know quite so well, is that the United States is de facto segregated. Um, we don't have legal um, segregation anymore in the United States, thanks to Brown versus Board of Education. But thanks to another Supreme Court decision called Milliken versus Bradley, we have de facto economic segregation. And that comes from local school boards' right to control tax policy and resource questions. So there are hundreds of borders in the United States where one school district has a poverty rate that's 20 points or more lower than its adjacent neighbor. And because there's so much variation, what the standard white life course is in America is to live in the city until you have children, and then either send your kids to private school or move to an affluent suburb. And what they're doing is chasing extra resources and access to extracurriculars and narratives that elite colleges choose to value. And the thing that I don't think most people focus on is that elite colleges are driving the train much more than they would admit. I mean, they would say they are the victims, or that they're reproducing underlying conditions of inequality in America. But to a much larger extent than they certainly would admit, they're actually the cause of inequality in America.
And what are reasons that make you say, or data that makes you say, that they are in fact the reason or the cause for this inequality, much rather that they follow this trend?
Oh, I mean, it's, for example, the things that they choose to value. So why do elite colleges run sports programs or place value on, as came out in the Asian students lawsuit against Harvard, which the Supreme Court just heard oral arguments on last week, what they call distinguishing excellences, like science projects or participation in Model United Nations programs. None of these things, including SAT scores, have any demonstrated relationship to performance in college. The best predictor of performance in college is high school rank. So Harvard and Yale could admit a better prepared, more likely to succeed group of high school students if they just based admissions on high school rank, if they just chose among valedictorians and salutatorians. But they don't want to do that because that would upset their tacit agreements that they've had with private high schools like Groton and Andover and Exeter, from which they take 5 to 10 students every year. And it's an unspoken agreement that if you spend the tuition to get your money into these schools, that it'll give you a significant leg up in getting your kid into elite colleges.
So, what if not the test scores in high school, I just want to call it, they value? What is it that elite colleges value instead? You mentioned sports, you mentioned different extracurricular activities, I'm just going to call it.
Well, about Harvard, and Harvard's actually at the low end of this. Harvard fills about a third of its class with athletes. They're called ALDC preferences: athletes, legacies, donors, and the children of faculty members. So they take about a third of their spots and reserve them for kids who play sports. And, it's important to remember that those sports aren't equally accessible to all, not by a long shot. So, in America, at least, most people only watch Division I college basketball or football on TV. And there's lots of Black participation in those sports. So people think they're an avenue of opportunity, but it's not true. Division III football and basketball, smaller schools that don't give athletic scholarships, are overwhelmingly white. And then, Harvard, for example, runs 42 sports teams, including programs in lacrosse and squash and fencing and 2 skiing programs. And, most of my students have never even heard of many of these sports. So, I mean, does that make Harvard a better place, having a good downhill skiing team? It's preposterous. But all of these little buckets take away opportunity from socioeconomically disadvantaged students, or just from people who aren't super advantaged socioeconomically.
But that is, of course, not outspoken, right? If I understand correct, like to the outside, it still has the facade to be open and equal opportunity, while in fact, it is much more difficult for a working class child, even though he or she may have the very best scores and is a bright child, to access one of those so-called elite colleges. Is that correct?
Correct. I mean, if you're born into the top 1% of the income distribution in America, you have about a 1 in 4 chance of ending up at an elite college, and virtual certainty of ending up at a selective college. The only people who don't make it, fall out for health reasons, or because they choose to enter the workplace. Or if you're born into the bottom income quintile in the United States, which is around $20,000 a year, which is very, very little money, your chance of ending up at an elite college is less than 0.5%.
So if you like that, make sure to check out the full-length episode here and leave a subscribe. Thank you.